Hey, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'm Roger Noonan, President of the New England Farmers Union, and thanks all for taking the time out for this session. And I'm going to happy to introduce one of our New England Farmers Union board members and the executive director of the neighboring Food Co-op Association, Urban Crowell, who is the mastermind behind this uh, presentation. And this is part of our ongoing advocacy initiative sponsored by CoBank. And again, just happy to have you take the time out of this beautiful day here in New England. Thanks.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, it seems like we're definitely fighting against a gorgeous day out there, but thank you all for joining us. Do just want to, again, reiterate our appreciation for you all taking the time. Briefly, just want to share, the Federation of Southern Co-ops has been a central partner in our work, helping engage our members and our community in a broader dialogue on the relationship between the cooperative movement, the struggle for civil rights in the United States, and considering the potential for building a greater partnership around racial and economic justice and co-op development through partnerships. And since 2021, the Federation and the NFCA have been part of a formal partnership focused on building equitable trade relationships between Black-led co-ops in the South and our food co-ops in the North, expanding access to education and training, growing awareness of the co-op movement, and advocating for policies that not only support co-op development, but also build efforts for social and economic justice. And we're very thankful for their collaboration in this advocacy initiative with the Farmers Union. So we're looking forward to hearing more about the history of the Federation and their advocacy efforts, their legislative priorities, including land retention for Black farmers, and how we can all work together to advocate for a more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive food system and economy. Cornelius, I understand Stephanie Banks, Director of Land Retention Advocacy, will hopefully be able to join us as we get started here, but want to welcome you. For any of you who have been at the NFCA's annual meeting, you will recognize Cornelius. He's a regular guest at our gatherings, a recipient of the Neighboring Cooperator Award, and a fellow director on the NCBA Inclusive Board of Directors. So welcome, Cornelius. Thank you for taking the time to be with us, and looking forward to hearing your words.
Well, Urban, thank you, and thank you for the introduction. Roger, thank you for kicking it off. So look, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm no stranger to NFCA's events. And like Urban said, I was at a few annual meetings, and it's one of my favorite times of the year. One of the few times I get a chance to see some snow also. But it was an honor getting the Neighboring Cooperative Award, and it's been a pleasure being in partnership with you all. Urban said since 2021, that's when we made the relationship a little bit more formal, but we've been working together for a long time. And I've been with the Federation for almost 28 years now, and I've been knowing Urban for all of those 28 years, I would say. And I've been leading the Federation for almost 10 now. And so it has truly been a pleasure to be a part of the cooperative community in the role that I play, sitting around with the Federation. But also in terms of really, our work focuses on that divergence between the cooperative movement and the civil rights movement. And it's been a pleasure to kind of have those things in common and to work together around those kind of issues. This partnership is extremely important to us. And so we look forward to continuing it. It really exemplifies cooperation among cooperatives. And so it's been a huge pleasure to work with co-ops in the North and connecting them with the co-ops, with our cooperative movement in the South, so that we show that there's real partnership around the country from different regions, but also from different perspectives and different backgrounds. And our focus has primarily been on advocacy and what it looks like. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. But before I do, for those who are not familiar with the Federation, let me at least kind of give some background information on me and the Federation. So the Federation is a cooperative association of Black farmers, landowners, and cooperatives all around the South. Federation was founded directly out of the Civil Rights Movement in 1967 We just celebrated our 57th year at our annual meeting a couple of months ago. Urban and some of you all have attended those and been fixtures around that. But our mission as an organization is to be a catalyst for the development of self-supporting communities via cooperative economic development, land retention, and advocacy. That's been our mission since 1967 and continues to be. So it shows a lot of consistency within our organization, but it also shows the challenge, where the challenge areas are, because we've been working on those issues for 57 years. And those issues, again, are cooperative economic development, land retention, and advocacy. Those are the three focus areas of our organization. And cooperative economic development from a standpoint of really helping to organize, continue to strengthen, and connect and grow cooperatives in the South, and especially among Black communities, Black rural communities. Economic land retention from the standpoint of really retaining and saving Black-owned land. That has been a huge challenge for us in this country for decades. And there are stats that talked about Black land ownership declining over 1,000 acres, 100%, 1,000 acres per year. And one primary reason for that is heirs property, which is in the bucket of land retention. So we do a lot of that work around heirs property where folks don't have secure titles because land is passed down informally from generation to generation after the death of a landowner. And then advocacy, which is the area where we're focusing on today, really making sure that there's good policies, programs, and resources out for the kind of work we do, the communities where we work. So I take a breath. I see Stephanie Banks just joined. Stephanie is our new Director of Land Retention and Advocacy. Stephanie is a lawyer. Stephanie's background is in heirs property and estate will and estate planning, real estate law, and a number of others related to this kind of work. She's been with us now for a couple of months, but she's not new to our work. Family's been part of the Federation. Grandfather was a farmer, and so she's been connected to this work probably as long as I've been here at the Federation, one way or the other, even in terms of serving as a lawyer for the organization some years ago. But Stephanie's on, and Stephanie, I'll at least give you an opportunity to say hi to the group here.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to see everyone. I'm excited about this opportunity for us to collaborate. Also want to apologize for being a little bit tardy. I was in another meeting, an executive meeting, and I was actually speaking on a topic and couldn't leave out until we exhausted what we were discussing. But thank you. Good to meet everyone. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Stephanie. And so let me get down to, so I told you a little bit about the Federation. And we work all over the South, as I mentioned. We're chartered to work in 17 states, including the District of Columbia, where we were chartered. And we were chartered in the District of Columbia 57 years ago because we couldn't get chartered in the South at our home states where we work for obvious reasons. You still can't get this kind of charter in the South. So it's a huge struggle with us historically in terms of really chartering cooperatives, but more importantly, chartering the Federation. But we're chartered to work in 17 states, including the District of Columbia. We focus on 7 of those states, 7 states in the Deep South: Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, Louisiana, Florida, Texas. I think I named 7. There we have physical offices, staff, board representation. Our organization right now is between 75 and 100 staff because, again, we're 75 permanently, but another 25 who are fluctuating in and out based on a lot of programs and work that we're doing in those 7 states, where we work through what we call state associations, where cooperatives are joined together to direct or lead the work in some of the states. And we as a federation making up 75 cooperatives and community-based organizations around those 7 states. And the staff's job is to assist our membership of Black farmers, landowners, and cooperatives throughout those states and those areas that I spoke about: co-op development, land retention, and advocacy. I've been again with the Federation for 27, almost 28 years, and leading it for 9, almost 10. I started out in Alabama, the organization, and relocated to Atlanta to start doing a lot of our international work, our marketing work, our field work, and then eventually becoming the deputy director of the organization and then the executive director again almost 10 years ago. But as it relates to advocacy in terms of this organization, we focus on those areas around cooperatives and around land retention primarily. And we also focus on one of the largest pieces of legislation in our country, the Farm Bill, because many of the programs that we operate under as a partner with the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, are framed within the Farm Bill. But also, again, that focus for us around advocacy is around looking at cooperatives and looking at land retention primarily. And so, as I mentioned to you, in the South, there are no good co-op laws that you all are fortunate to be subside under in northeastern states. In the South, there are no good co-op laws, and so that presents a challenge for us. So we're always looking to figure out how to strengthen the cooperative laws in the South. I've been doing that work for a number of years. But because there are no good co-op laws, many of our co-ops are forced to get organized as nonprofits. And as you can realize, that challenge exists if, number one, the organization is not truly owned by its membership. Then if it dissolves, monies get split between other nonprofits as opposed to the members of the co-op. Secondly, they can't enjoy things like patronage refunds, which the whole premise of building the co-ops to build income. So we have that challenge first and foremost on the cooperative side. On the heirs property side in general, we have a very similar challenge. Heirs property is a creature of the state, just like co-op law is. Every state is different in terms of heirs property. And again, heirs property is one of the major reasons that Black farmers and many others lose land, and especially in the South. And so we have to navigate the laws in each state. We've worked over the years to get uniform heirs property laws, some are called the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, in many of the states, in the states where we are. Now, every state doesn't have it, so it's a patchwork. So we continue to work on that in order to really resolve the heirs property issue. And again, that issue is when a landowner passes away, doesn't have a will or some type of estate plan. The heirs of that land are the owners, but there's no clear owner. And in our country, you can't get access to many USDA programs, loans from banks and others when you don't have a clear title. And again, it leads to a loss of land in many cases. So working on that heirs property issue in general is one of the other things that we do. Now let me boil down to be specific in terms of our priorities. Our priorities in the co-op space are, again, continue to look at good co-op laws around the South in each state, but also, and more germane to this conversation, is looking at things like, which recently passed, the local Farmers Procurement Act, LFPA, which resources were going directly into communities, especially limited resource farmers, to supply produce in situations of disaster, whether it was a natural disaster or man-made disaster. But how do you get food into communities by local farmers and those resources being part of disaster efforts? And so we worked on that because we saw it played a tremendous impact in low-income communities from both a consumer side, but also from a producer side, where farmers were able to really benefit from things like that and supply food directly and have increase in income in doing so. So we do a co-op symposium every year where we bring cooperatives together, co-op advocates together to talk about the issues in the South, pretty much particular to the communities where we work at our cooperatives. And that was one of the number one things that came up around really advocating for that local local Farmers Food Production Act, LFPA. But there's other things I know you all are aware of, and Urban and I work closely on to really trying to always protect the cooperative movement, where there was situations where conversations were about how do investors become member owners of co-ops. and we stood with that to help push against that, because we know that limited resource communities will be the first to be targeted by many of these investors in dissipating the ownership model around cooperatives, and which is a danger, we think, to our communities and co-ops that we serve. So that was also a big part of the work and what we heard at our co-op symposium and what we continue to work on. So those are the areas around cooperatives. And then as it relates to heirs property, again, looking at each state and making sure that there's uniform, there's heirs property laws in each of those states where we work, and especially in the South where heirs property is a big threat, but also looking at how do we make this uniform where all states have the same laws in a uniform sense. But on a specific front, one of the things that we've worked with for decades and we've worked on, we did an heirs property study about 45 years ago and had about 19 recommendations. Many of those recommendations yet to be implemented. One in particular was some around what we call the heirs property relending program. We called it about a different name back 45 years ago, but it was recently passed about in the 2018 Farm Bill after all those years. And that's one of the things that we've been working on as a pilot program in collaboration with USDA. There are 3 pilot projects, 1 in the African American community, 2 in the Native American communities. We implement the one in the Black community, in the African American community. And that heirs property relending program allows us to get funding to lend out to heirs property landowners to start clearing their titles, which again has been one of the major reasons that Black landowners have lost land. And the way we connected to the cooperative movement, because many of those cooperative members also are heirs property landowners. And when their land is threatened, the co-op loses members, the co-ops are threatened, the cooperative movement overall is threatened, and especially in our community. So it's a huge issue, and there's interconnections. But with the heirs property relending program, again, it is authorized in each farm bill. And the upcoming farm bill, as you know, that has been delayed, there's been conversations about improving or dismantling that heirs property relending program. And so we've been fighting hard to make sure the heirs property relending program continues and is authorized at even higher dollars. Right now it's a $10 million appropriation. So we're able to lend out dollars to our landowners, again, that have heirs property issues to really clear those titles. But that legislation, that particular program right now is being threatened within the next farm bill. And so we're really fighting to keep that a big part of the farm bill and reauthorize even at higher amounts. So I'm going to stop there. I've said a mouthful. Stephanie, I don't know if you want to add on to anything I've said. And then Urban, I'll hand it back to you and see if there's questions or anything else from there.
I'm fine. Thank you. You did a great job, of course.
Right. Urban, I'll hand it back to you and see if there's questions. How do you want to move forward now?
Well, thank you so much, Cornelius. I think, one of the questions we always have, and then we've talked about a lot, and I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts on, particularly related to the Farm Bill or other opportunities, is, knowing how many members the Farmers Union and our food co-ops have in the Northeast. Are there any areas where we can apply pressure to decision makers around some of the issues that you've just mentioned, particularly heirs property as it relates to Farm Bill or other legislation? And I know Farm Bill is a bit of a mess right now, but I don't know if you've had an opportunity to think about that at all, because we're always thinking about how we can use our legislative influence to impact some of the challenges that you all face from another vantage point, right? They're probably used to hearing from you on these issues. Is there a way for us to add our voice to yours on some of these issues?
Well, Urban, you summed it up beautifully, because that is the challenge. We're always going to be advocating on these issues, and they expect that. But our challenge is really sometimes going across aisle, sometimes going across geographical lines. And so we work hard at that because we don't think these issues these are bipartisan issues that we see. If folks see it from that perspective, if they see how it impacts not only Black farmers, not only Black landowners, not only Black communities, not only the South, but all. And so I was in a conversation yesterday with the White House had some folks from their leadership from their from the leadership team come down and really want to do a listening session with some of our members in terms of what's been working, what hasn't. And one of the stories I told them, and I say here, was about a toxic bloom that happened in Toledo, Ohio, back in I think 2016. So we're talking about 8 or 9 years ago. But that toxic bloom shut down Toledo and killed the whole water supply. 500,000 people couldn't access water. It impacted that community directly, but it was billions of dollars that came from the government for cleanup. And there's even more dollars that go toward helping to prevent things like this. And so that toxic bloom was because of runoff from a farm into the river in Ohio. Those things are subject to happen in all 50 states. And it has the ability to impact all of us, our whole nation, in terms of those who are consuming water, but also in terms of the government, in terms of where tax dollars go. So everything that happens in agriculture impacts all of us, either directly or indirectly, if we choose to see it that way. And so right now, the biggest threat in the South, and especially from Black communities, in terms of land ownership. As Black farmers lose land, that land goes out of agriculture. And so it threatens our country in terms of our food supply and everything else. But it also, until those things are secured, you have other issues, like I mentioned in Toledo, where education has to happen from a conservation standpoint, and also in terms of how our food moves, whether it's from the South to the North or wherever, in terms of feeding people. Because the South is a part of the bread basket in this country. And I think as we lose farmers, no matter what their backgrounds or their races are, it threatens our overall food supply. It threatens those who are selling food, those who are consuming food. And I think as we think about this in whole, we then start working together better or more. And so, again, I mentioned in the start of this program, I was grateful for this relationship because it is these kind of relationships that I think that matter in terms of protecting our food supply and protecting our environment, but also in terms of really crafting better legislation. Because again, we speak to legislators in the South, we speak to the Congressional Black Caucus, but we're not speaking to your legislators in the Northeast. We're not speaking to folks who have a vested interest in food and grocery stores and cooperative grocery stores, and et cetera. And I think the more we speak together, the better off we are. So Urban, and answering your question in particular, as it relates to this heirs property issue as a great example, we think that other legislators in the Northeast and folks who you all are connected with need to understand that bigger picture and why it's important. And more importantly, understand why these pilot programs exist, and they should be allowed to continue to see how they truly work and how they have an impact, and not dismantling it for political reasons. So this heirs property relending program is a very good example where we could use the kind of partnership or the muscle you all have to talk about it and to help keep it intact, because it's we think it's a very worthwhile program and piece of legislation. Again, it's some research that we did 45 years ago that just come to fruition. And now we're struggling with trying to keep it afloat because it's being attacked legislatively.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just before we got on, Roger and I were talking a little bit about this question, and Roger made the point that obviously heirs property has unique characteristics and issues for Black farmers in the South, but Roger pointed out it's not just. I mean, this is an issue for all farmers. And Roger, I don't know if you want to share any thoughts on the legislative opportunities or challenges around this question, and the potential for making it clear this is a much bigger issue, and potentially having some impact on it.
Yeah, Cornelius, thank you. That was a great presentation. It's I don't think a lot of us really appreciate just how meaningful or impactful your 45-year quest is to get a little taste of justice on this one has been. And just one question on the structure of that. So you have an annual appropriation attached to that. So it's not baseline funded, right? So it's not mandatorily funded. You have to get the appropriators to agree to it every year.
Exactly.
And so if we don't get an extension in the Farm Bill, or if there's I guess we're past the government shutdown date now. But if we don't get an extension in the Farm Bill, is that money still on the table until it's exhausted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Great question, Roger. It's still on the table as part of a continuing resolution right now. So yes, it is. But again, so while we were up talking about this couple to several weeks ago, we almost got to the point where we said, well, it's a good thing. It's a bad thing overall if the Farm Bill is not passed. But it was a good thing for us in terms of kicking the can down the road, because until they got back on it, we operated under continuing resolution. So we're operating as it was proposed originally right now until the Farm Bill conversations come back up. But we're in favor of getting a new Farm Bill on the table. We're just scared once it gets back on the table if it changes this heirs property relending program. But to answer your question directly, yes, it's still funded right now, operating under continuing resolution.
Yeah. And where was it in the chairman's mark on the House Ag Committee? Did he cut it out or plus it up or keep it steady?
Well, right now there's a couple of different competing proposals, and that's the challenge with it. And what we found out, we actually met with the Senate Ag Committee and found out that that one piece of legislation came from Congressman Sanford Bishop and Davis in North Carolina, Georgia and North Carolina representatives. Another one came from Texas. Then there's one that's being formed on the Senate side with Senator Warnock. But they all look a little bit different. And what we found is there were a number of people talking about this issue, but most who knew nothing about it, and they had influence in those offices. When we were able to get up there and get to them, they then put on the table, and the word they said in the Senate Ag Committee was, wow, we wish we had this conversation a year ago. And my point was, well, you should have had it a year ago, because people should have been reaching out to the folks who know heirs property. And why wouldn't somebody reach out if there's 3 pilot projects in this nation? Why wouldn't one of those pilot projects be reached out to? And so it kind of shows you how policy is done sometimes in our country, and led by sometimes people who are not aware. But well, I guess on the bright side of it, they all had good intentions, it seemed, in terms of really, because they called it improving the act. But I said to them, it's not improving at all, because here are the nuances that you don't understand. And so they now said, look, we're going to all get everybody together and see if we can kind of really get something that's a joint proposal, something in common. So we're hopeful right now, Roger. But the more people that kick in on this, the better, I think, because again, it's still confined to 3 congressional offices that have provided input. There's nobody from the North. And as you said, Roger, great point, because we speak about it from the standpoint of heirs property in the South, and particularly with Black landowners, but it's a huge issue in the Native American community. And as you stated, Roger, even beyond that, we've begun to work with Nationwide. Nationwide has this big program called Land as Your Legacy. And in some of those meetings, I found out that, hey, it's just called succession planning. There's an issue with succession planning in the Midwest and with all the other farmers as well. They struggle with succession planning. They just don't talk about it from the standpoint of heirs property. Or it might not be that property is right in the hand of heirs now, but it's in the broad scheme of things, it's succession planning. And so it is a huge issue for farmers all around the country, no matter what geographical area you're in, no matter what race you are. Succession plan is a huge issue to make sure farms continue. But for us, it's particularly around that heirs property issue.
Yep.
And I think that's something that we can all coalesce around.
Yep. Yep. And I think the lower you are on the financial spectrum, the harder it is to engage highly qualified attorneys like Stephanie and others to get that assistance you need. And you know, it only takes one heir in a contested will to force the sale.
Exactly.
You know, that's the same for you, your family, or my family. You know, and if you don't, you know, and a lot of Midwest folks with these highly productive farmlands, well, they've established corporations that just sort of perpetuate that generational wealth, while the rest of us, you know, might struggle to come up pay the taxes or the past due bills on a sale. So it's you know, it's not only a an equity issue, but it's all a racial equity issue, but it's also an economic equity issue. And I think that's something that our members of Congress, and Rosa DeLauro, you know, who's the ranking member on the House Appropriations Committee, and Shelley Pingree, you know, on both Ag and Appropriations Committee, you know, should hear about. And you know, if you ever want to get together with Urban and I and do some targeted outreach to those folks, we'd be happy to participate in that.
We would be happy to do that. So Stephanie and I, we'll talk a little bit after this and we'll figure out a plan. We'll be happy to do that because, Roger, again, that'll be not only welcome, but I think it'll be a huge benefit because you're right. It's not just an equity issue on a number of fronts, but it's also a food security issue. And I think when our folks start thinking about that, as you lose farmers, you lose the agricultural base of this country. And I think we don't want to go there as a nation. I think people have to see what the end result could be if we don't stop this problem.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you both. For folks on the call, as you can probably tell, we could go on nonstop talking about these issues and not let anyone get a word in edgewise. But I'd love to let someone else get a word in edgewise. This is an opportunity for our members, for Farmers Union members to engage more with our friends from the Federation. So I wanted to just take a moment to open it up here, see if anyone on the call has any questions that you might want to ask Cornelius or Stephanie about the Federation and its work, or some of the sometimes obscure issues we've just been talking about, and the challenges of working with government bureaucracy. So anyone have a question you want to jump in or raise your hand? Don't be shy.
Urban, I'll throw one out there. You know, I know a number of our co-ops have been asking about their representatives joining the cooperative caucus, and I wonder if there isn't maybe an inroad there somewhere to suggest that they that might be an issue to be raised, or an area to explore. Like, can the cooperative caucus have some awareness around what's happening with the Federation? I'm sure they probably already do, but I wonder if that would be an effective route.
Urban, I don't know if you want to join in with that, but Suzette, thanks. That's a great question because Urban mentioned earlier that he and I both serve on the NCBA board together, the National Co-op Business Association. I know NCBA has done a lot of work about really around putting that cooperative caucus together and helping to keep it together and feed it information. And that's one of the things that I've talked with Doug O'Brien, the CEO of NCBA, about. Hey, we really either need to get somebody from the Congressional Black Caucus onto that co-op caucus, or we need to find out a pathway, a pipeline where we can feed some information. We haven't gotten there yet, but it's definitely something to think about. And something we want to continue working on. And again, we look for every opportunity to work with NFCA on number of opportunities, because again, you have a voice that we don't have in an area where we don't have it. So maybe there's areas that we can talk about joint ways to bring our issues to the cooperative caucus, and we welcome that greatly.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think that's a great question, Suzette. You know, we've got some really good representation up here with McGovern from Massachusetts, Pingree in Maine. For folks on the call, just to know, we recently recruited Rebecca Mallon from Vermont onto the caucus, and I think we have a couple folks from Maine. We've been in dialogue with Jared Golden's office in Maine about joining, and this is an area we haven't really leveraged the co-op caucus around this question. But my guess is this is an area where they would understand what we're talking about, why it matters. You know, not just in terms of heirs property and racial and economic justice, but also its linkage with cooperative values and principles. So I think that could be a really interesting question when the time comes, right? When a certain legislative opportunity comes up, that would be a great thing to talk with NCBA about. So that's an excellent question. I see Alan Reed's Hanover Co-op Food Stores hand. Welcome, Alan.
Good morning or good afternoon indeed. And Cornelius, pleasure to see you again. Always so grateful just to sit in on what is must be a very full day, many decades in a row. First quick apologies to Urban and Roger. Normally my Farmers Union sign is up in the background because it's on all calls, so it must have fallen down. I just noticed, and I was aghast not to see it in the background. So I'll correct that for my next call. Local Farmers Procurement Act. I admit some ignorance on that, so I'm not sure if there's a deep dive link somebody could throw into the chat. I always am willing to add my voice on any topic, any of the ones that have been brought up thus far. That sounds like an important one. And if there's challenges or opportunities, I always need to know the good, the bad, and the frustrating. So from there, I'll just turn it back.
Alan, well, first of all, thanks, and good to see you too. So I always look forward to seeing many of you, and you're one of them, Alan. So on the LFPA, that you're right. I think it's extremely useful. Again, we think it's a great disaster assistance tool, but it also, again, it benefits the consumer side and the producer side. This, I think, is set to expire in March, if I'm not mistaken. But it was that allowed for a lot of local food purchasing throughout the South, directly from farmers, from co-ops, to supply food as a response to many of the disasters. We think it is a great model to be built upon from a disaster standpoint, but from a number of different ways if we get a chance to sit down and really think through it. One of the challenges, Alan, is that when this purchasing agreement flows from the federal government down to each state, and then the state makes decisions on where it's actually utilized. And as I pointed out earlier, we've had many challenges being based in the South. There's still issues where cooperative laws don't succeed because in the South it's very much anti-union, and they think co-ops are unions. And so you fight against that misinformation, if you will. But also when it comes down to these states with things like the LFPA, the state, the governor or the commissioner of ag or somebody makes those decisions of how it's laid out. And unfortunately, when it gets down to places like Mississippi and Alabama, they will say things like, we couldn't find any Black farmers when we looked, or something, and it ends up not going down to places where we benefit from programs like this, agreements or acts like this, which we think are very beneficial programs. We think they have the potential to do a whole lot once you look into it. So I would look forward, Alan, to some of us talking, really kind of flesh this out to give some more details about it and how it actually worked and the opportunities. But we do think it's one of the areas where there's tremendous opportunity.
Thank you.
I'll chime in on that. too, because that's sort of an outgrowth during COVID under the CARES Act.
Yep.
I think that was the first one where they had the provision to do the food box program.
Yep.
And small farmers without a third-party food safety audit couldn't participate. And so even though it was sort of spelled out in the act that it should benefit small farmers, USDA's Agriculture Marketing Service said, if you don't have a third-party food safety audit, which is a fairly high threat, overly expensive process to go through for a small farm, and they were showing great inflexibility there. And I think the LFPA was an attempt to sort of mitigate that by kicking it to the state. So USDA could say, well, look, we're not responsible for this food safety issue here. Now, that was AMS's canard. They always hung it on. They needed to have the certainty of it had passed some food safety standard. So they kicked it to the states. And Alan, you haven't heard about it because our state commissioner of agriculture is kind of sleeping on the job, and he subbed it out to the New Hampshire Food Bank, and they run the program with Oris particularly. So it is working for farmers of color in New Hampshire. I don't know what the other states are doing around us, but it didn't get a lot of typically these programs have a high cost of implementation, and they don't come with enough of an administrative overhead cost for the state, especially states with small budgets like New Hampshire, to implement it. So they look for an outside partner and kick it over to them. But fundamentally, a great program. I think it's stuff we advocated for previously, and using COVID as the example. When people weren't able to get food at the grocery store, it was all these small farmers and small volunteer groups that just started popping up and delivering food in church parking lots and home delivery. I mean, the community, our communities are pretty resilient and really stood. And one other point I wanted to make too, we're on the verge of a very important election, and it can go one way and it could be good. It can go another way and it could be not so good. But Cornelius, you pointed out 45 years. You didn't stop. You went through good administrations and bad administrations. So regardless of what happens in a couple of weeks, you got to still put the work in. You got to still turn that stone until you get it milled down to what you want. And I just think you probably got more experience, fighting uphill battles than any of us here. And I think it's just important for all of us to think about as we're going forward that the sun will come up, and we got to keep doing the work.
Yeah, Roger, great point. I couldn't say it any better. And actually, at our last staff retreat, we used that as an example of really what development work looks like. It doesn't happen overnight, and you got to come into this understanding that it's a process. But again, and we also use that to show the value of the cooperative movement, because when you work together, when you aggregate people, it gives you the ability to withstand all that and take that uphill climb, if you will. So it's deeply entrenched in terms of our history, but more importantly, in terms of the model of our work and how it takes a while to make change, and you got to be ready for that. So you're absolutely right. But this work doesn't get done without partnerships like this. And again, I say thank you, because again, it has been, sometimes we all don't see all the work that's happening. Urban and I spend a lot of time together when we're together, and a lot of conversations when we're not, but always moving that ball. And sometimes it's hard to keep your eye on it because it's moving so slow and moving in the dark sometimes. And so really thank you for lifting that up, because you're absolutely right. But this all boils down to really programs are implemented, and how they go through the state sometimes matter, because they have well intentions in DC at times, and to get to the state level and change, and sometimes vice versa. But really understanding that in the context of each other's perspective matters, and how we work together on it matters, and it has really mattered for us.
Yeah, I just want to appreciate that, Cornelius. It can be really frustrating how slow change goes, and not losing our commitment to it. But Federation is at 57 years now, has been at this, and trying to figure out how to engage people in what is a long, challenging struggle that doesn't always have results that day, can be really difficult. And I think a big part of the value of the partnership with the Federation, is not just the work that you all do every day, but the chance to learn from that history and understand that this is a long haul challenge. All of these issues are not things that we're going to get what we want overnight, and we have to figure out how to maintain that commitment and solidarity over time, if we want to move the ball forward, like you said. So I just want to make sure anyone else on the call have any questions for us. If not, I might ask Stephanie if she has any questions for us, because Stephanie, I have not had the pleasure of meeting before. Really glad you could join us. Wonder if you have any thoughts or questions for us, who we are, what we do, thoughts on how we can support your work and success with the Federation. Just want to make sure you feel free to join in and ask any questions you might have. We're closing in on an hour. We don't want to go past one, but want to make sure we take advantage of this opportunity.
Well, thank you. Yes, with me being new, I'm always, I'm cautious. I like to listen and learn. Some people, don't, but I do. I like to sit back and listen and learn. But yes, if you would like to share with me from your perspective, the what your organization does, because I have done some looking into it, of course. But from your perspective, what the organization does, and then how you see us partnering well together, because I understand this is one of my responsibilities for the Federation.
Well, Roger, thank you, Stephanie. And Roger, I don't know if you want to chime in a little bit about the Farmers Union, sort of the historic role with cooperatives and collaboration with small farmers in the South. But I'll just say, briefly, Neighboring Food Co-op Association, similarly to the Federation, is a cooperative of food co-ops here in the Northeast. A lot of the reason behind our organizing was trying to not only understand and communicate our collective impact. At this point, we're 44 food co-ops and startups, 185,000 collective members, 2,500 employees, 60% of them are also members. How could we leverage our shared learning experience and those 185,000 members, even if a small portion of them became engaged in these issues, how could we not only impact the food system and policy here in the Northeast, but partner with organizations like the Federation to be sort of an outside partner on some of the challenges that you all face, and help move things that feel immovable down there through collaboration, partnership, building a deeper understanding of our common ground. And that's really the crux of our work. The Federation has always been important to me personally. I've done a lot of work with your members over time, with Ralph Page over time, and then had the pleasure of working with Cornelius, Ben Burkett. And the things that we want to do together, the potential that we have is always tantalizing, and we would love for it to be happening now. And I think this is something I talk with Cornelius about all the time. It's not going to happen right now. Like, we have to be committed to making change over time, and committed to each other as partners over time to make these things happen. And if we give up because it didn't happen right when we wanted it to, then we will have failed. So we're constantly trying to check in with each other and just figure out where are the opportunities to move our efforts for justice just a little bit closer to where we want them to be. And certainly here in the Northeast, that's been the rationale for our collaboration with the Farmers Union. You know, we not only have this commitment to supporting local farmers in our region, finding ways to have common cause family farmers, but we also had this shared cooperative legacy together to build on, which we don't always have with other local farm advocacy groups, right? They don't understand the cooperative legacy as much as the Farmers Union does, and certainly not as much as the Federation does. So trying to find ways to build on that common ground is what we're really trying to do. So appreciate that question, and do hope at some point you might be able to join us for an annual meeting and get to see, you know, what some of these food co-ops are doing on the ground. You know, really, we're just a representation for the community co-ops that are really building economic democracy, building local food systems every day, and we're just trying to help them have more impact. So getting to come up here and see that, that invitation is always open.
Well, thank
Roger,
you.
I don't
I'm
know if
looking
you'd like
forward
to
to that.
add anything about the Farmers Union. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to walk over you
No, I was just saying, thank you. I look forward to that. I'm looking forward to that.
there.
Yes.
Yeah, well, Stephanie, the Farmers Union was formed in 1902 during the sort of height of the rubber baron era, and was instrumental in the development of the cooperative movement in the United States. Played a played a big role, you know, throughout ag policy through the New Deal. Of course, during the New Deal is when a lot of the disparities in small farm um, issues, you know, especially in the South, started to come to fruition. You know, or at least became highly public. We had the organization at that time did try to make some great strides, but as Cornelius pointed out, Union and South are not two things that go well together. And so that the early organizers, the African American farmers that were the early organizers there, were targeted and subject to, you know, horrendous barbarity, of course. And so that, you know, and there was sort of that split. You know, if you're a fan of labor and history, then you know there was sort of that split between the socialist progressive movement and the black community. Boom, just, you know, because racism. So that it wasn't necessarily part of Farmers Union legacy in the South, but that just sort of created a divide that made the South almost impenetrable for Farmers Union after that. Yeah, because it's a grassroots organization, and we rely on that farmer to say, "Hey, I'm going to start a chapter," you know, and you know, it's hard to do in a toxic environment. So we find it hard sometimes here in the Northeast. I mean, union is still not a popular word. So,
Roger, thanks for that. And I learned a lot over the last 10 years. I'm working with the National Farmers Union, and especially its history and the work around the civil rights movement, which was vast. And so we have a lot in common, but also in terms of the New Deal, because you know, the Federation was founded after the New Deal started and all that, but the New Deal played a huge part because many of the cooperatives that was the basis of the first 22 cooperatives were formed out of the New Deal, some of the New Deal programs. And so I think there's a lot of connections. And Urban with NFCA, you know, I got a chance to come up there and really see the history of the NFCA. And I think you call it the Middlebury document. Or I was so impressed with that in terms of, you know, really being able to trace the history back to that document, and that spawned off those food co-ops, which has now led to the 44 that you talked about. But it's impressive, and even how people talk about it during the annual meeting and how the work happens there and at NFU, and really to see democracy at work. And we hope the same thing when you come to our annual meeting. A similar thing takes place on Saturday for us. And so really, there's not many organizations that really exercise democracy the way they speak about it. And so it's always good to be in community with those that do. And I think the more we work together on things, that we push that idea out there, because that's what it is about at the end of the day, democracy and how folks can work together to build their own communities.
Well, thank you, Cornelius. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next annual meeting. I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. Really appreciate you and Stephanie taking the time. I know as you said, you're just coming off a bunch of meetings yesterday. You got a bunch today. We really appreciate you taking the time to share a little bit of your history and work, and more importantly, your thoughts on how we can continue this work together. So thank you again, everyone on the call. Thanks for being with us. We will post a recording of this session, and just keep your eyes out for our next webinar. We'll be working on some more webinars around policy advocacy, which we hope you will join. And yeah, thank you all, and have a great day.
Do the
Thank you,
same.
everyone.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Take care.